Hey, MBA hopefuls, we are live on the air with MBA Waves, talking all things business and education. Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe because it helps us to continue to create all this free content free on MBA Waves. Today on episode 139, we are talking about how AI is being used in so many creative areas where authenticity may be called into account, including MBA admissions, of course. Today, we're going to learn about what does it mean to be authentic in your art and your MBA applications, how the birth of AI may be changing how we define our world in arts and in education, and how you should and should not use AI in your MBA admissions applications. This week, I'm your host, Eric Lucrezia, joined by my co-host, Bara Sapir and Krithika Srinivasan, and we are joined by two special guests, five-time published author Sparkle Bold Richards and Executive Director of Master's Admissions from Carnegie Mellon University, Tepper School of Business, J.R. McGrath. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome to the show, everyone. We're going to just jump right into it, as always. Today's episode is kind of unique. I think it's really cool to have the opportunity to join two universes that don't often have the chance to collide. That is to say, higher education and the world of art and literature. Sparkle, I'm addressing this to you first because we started this conversation several months ago when I started seeing hundreds of posts on Facebook and other platforms of AI-generated art, including some of your pieces, which are frankly fantastic. And I saw many comments calling out, what people were calling fake, not to your work in particular, but just in general, people calling out, oh, this is fake, or basically not authentic, right? And people were complaining that it's not real art, giving tips on how to spot AI-generated images and attacking the whole genre as a whole. So to start us off, Sparkle, could you please tell us about your journey as a visual artist, because you paint and draw, going from someone who initially rejected AI to someone who has now embraced it?
Well, I left Trinidad when I was 17 to move to the United States because I wanted to pursue fashion design. For many years before that, I would come here for the summer vacations. My mom was a home health aide in Manhattan, so I would have had an opportunity to see Fashion Institute of Technology from the house that she was then taking care of this older woman. And I had asked her, what's that building? And she had let me know that it was an art school. And before that, I had no concept of the idea that there was a school specifically for art, especially a higher learning school for art. Because in the Caribbean, we have the University of the West Indies, and that is a more comprehensive, think like Carnegie Mellon kind of school, where you can study different disciplines, but certainly not one educational line. And so I worked really hard to move here to then be able to go to FIT. And that was not very easy because as a Caribbean student living outside of the country for most of my life, I had to pay, I think it was 2.5 times more than everyone else to even sit in a class and be part of that. And it was very difficult for my family at that time too. And so I really worked very hard at being good at FIT and at fashion design and at art. But I was up against a classroom of many, many Asian clients and students who came from halfway across the world who had a leg up on me because they had already studied fashion design there. They had already learned to sew there. They had already learned all of these things and were just like formalizing that education to be able to work here. So imagine being in a classroom with people who have been doing this for maybe 5 years. And you're now coming in and you're learning the fundamentals. So it was very difficult to keep up at school, very difficult to maintain my GPA. And then there were other disciplines as well, because FIT is definitely a college. It's a SUNY, so State University of New York. So you have to take classes in art, you have to take classes in math, you have to take classes in literature. And that created an opportunity for me to see my art, not just as this one little microcosm that I was planning for it to be, but like a wider education that I wanted to have. And I struggled. I did struggle because fashion croquis are 8 heads. 8 heads meaning as long as 8 heads. Very, very tall women. My art had always been women that were like me, 5'5", short, a little curvy. And fashion models are tall, skinny creatures with very long arms and very long legs. And I struggled with even having my art stay my art through my whole education at FIT. And then I realized I had a rare opportunity to bring in what I learned from FIT into my own art and make me into a stronger artist. But the problem was that it immediately got rejected because of the tones of colors that I choose to use. Maybe you should be doing more Black people. my Black people would say. And then my fashion people would be like, well, maybe you should make them skinnier and taller. And so I was never having a place to fit what my art's point of view was. And I suffered a lot from trying to find a space that was my own. Over the years, because I also had an interest in the human body and the human form, stuff that came from my education at FIT, going to museums and looking at 18th century art and looking at what Michelangelo did and Manet did and Monet did and all the different people who were involved in creating the revolution and the renaissance of art. Now I wanted to show the human figure and the human form. And to me, also conceptualize that in a way that made it modern. So a lot of my art became very nude. And then I got kicked off Facebook and banned many times because of imagery. And I had a very difficult time with that, because if this person hundreds of years ago can do a topless woman, why is it wrong when I do it on Facebook? I'm not doing such a good job as they are. I'm two-dimensional art rather than three-dimensional with, tempura. And yet I was getting consistently banned from Facebook, and it kind of shoved my art and my reality underground. I had always felt like I didn't fit. I didn't really get into fashion design in New York because I was so different. My point of view was not something that was, something that people wanted 20 years ago. And so for a long time, I had this hurt inside of not being able to creatively express my art side. So I became an erotic novelist so that I could then say, okay, fine. If you're going to label me as this erotic person, I am going to take my erotic self into a genre that's acceptable or accepted. And I became, as Eric said earlier, Mr. Lucrezia, that I'm a 5-time best-selling novelist in erotica. But that also meant that I had to kind of pivot away from my true love of creating art. And when I got, kind of proposed with the idea of doing AI last year, I was absolutely against. I was like, no, I don't want to cut corners. I want to continue doing my own art. And then I had this feeling of, well, if I do my own art, I'm going to get banned on Facebook again. And now I have 5 books to consider. Do I really want to lose my account now by continuing to not follow their regulations and standards? And then I realized after a while that I had a rare opportunity to investigate why I didn't like it. To really think to myself, why is it that I'm against this particular type of art, this tool? I need to try this tool and determine on my own what my feelings are. So much of the education that we get now on the internet is a vacuum. One person says one thing and then somebody else repeats it and then it becomes fact. There's no communication between what your actual feeling is and the application of the product because you have been told that the product is bad. So I decided to go ahead and be brave and try it. And then I became immediately hooked. Things that I had in my mind for years that I was never able to make because I didn't have the education or the access to that education. Things I was unable to try because I didn't have the time to become that much of a multidisciplined artist became closed off to me. And I realized I had a rare opportunity to try things that had been inside of me for 20 years. And it was just like this boom of creativity. I could have in minutes what I would have conceptualized over 10 years. And then because I had this writing aspect of it, I was able to write prompts that were able to then show me my visual language outside of my literal language. So this entire process has been kind of an ongoing battle between who I want to be as an artist and what art really is. I hope I answered what you asked me. But that's how I feel now about AI.
Wow. That's some journey that you've been through. And throughout it, all I could think about was Sparkle is going to make like a wonderful business school applicant because she's trying to find a world of her own and showcase her own as well as express her own, but also this innate curiosity that you displayed.
Yeah.
Right. So Sparkle, we'll come back to you in a moment and the lovely journey that you shared with us. So this question is to JR. So JR, you have been on the, I would say, receiving end of many of these AI created content, I'm sure, as part of being in admissions. And of course, like from 2023 onwards, the whole world has seen a lot of usage of AI. Can you summarize about your thoughts behind it, especially as you see it in the world of admissions essays?
Yeah. And I guess I'll provide a little bit of context. Obviously, a little bit from my perspective, but we also, as you all know, right? Because a few of us were just in Spain, and a lot of us that run different admissions programs or admissions consultants, like we interact all the time. So we do hear a lot of how everyone is approaching this, not just from like our own perspective. But as things were announced, there was, I would say, a short amount of time, especially because I think business schools maybe got there a little bit faster than some other areas of the world. But there was that fear initially of, well, let's figure out policies of what can be used and where it can be used or not be used. And there was more of the worry about it. And now that it has just kind of blown up and it has kind of gone everywhere, everyone's now thinking through, how do we try to incorporate this into what we do? How do we create processes that everyone can feel comfortable using it, but then still be able to put themselves forward? That's my biggest worry with this, is that I want someone to utilize all of their tools at their disposal to be able to put their best self forward. And when I say their best self, like their authentic self forward. We don't want someone to use AI to create a representation that is not them, right? Like that's the only fear with it. So what I would say is we're trying to figure out how to embrace it. But in particular for us, how do we create this overall admissions process where someone can utilize these tools? But then where are those places? Well, I'll say like a checks and balances, right? And for me, it's usually the interview. You read this amazing application. These people put together these essays, and you're so excited to talk to them. If they fall completely flat when you meet them, then that's where you kind of go back and be like, well, where was that misstep, right? Because it didn't come forward authentically when there was an interaction. So for me, I hope people use it, because I think it's going to create better applications, and maybe it takes some of those barriers away from candidates to apply to the schools that are the best fit. But for me, like, how do we check that authenticity throughout the process?
Yeah, it's definitely hard to check. And this is one of the big things that was coming up at the AGAT conference last week. We talked about artificial intelligence in the application process. And of course, every school has their take on it, right? And it's been a journey. Just since last year, we've seen the responses evolve. And so it's interesting to hear how that's, as you said, we were first trying to figure out what to do about it. And now it's like, okay, it's there. It's being more accepted. And it's not, I would say, not being reactive, but more managing it. What I want to ask to both of you, I'll start up with Sparkle and then pivot to JR. So Sparkle, as an author, we're talking about authenticity here. How do you define authenticity in your storytelling?
When I first started writing books, I was young. 18, 19 years old. I had no concept of how to write a book. I just had an inspiration and an idea, and it was for my friends. So it wasn't going to matter if it was really good writing or not. And on your journey as a writer, you're always trying to find truth. Truth is at the core of the writing process. What can I extrapolate from my reality or someone else's reality to tell a story? In order to be able to tell the truth, you have to also be able to go deep and figure out what that means to you. And also to challenge concepts that you've been learned from your parents or from society, and then also challenge those concepts. That is at the heart of authenticity for me. Being able to harness a tool or being able to harness art or writing all comes from the same place, a creative desire. And in order to be creative, you also have to be kind of willing to look at your flaws and either decide if those flaws can be extrapolated upon to create something beautiful, or to then continue keeping you in kind of a fair space, a space where you can't grow. Doing erotica definitely puts you in that position, because it's constantly being appraised for what your point of view is on sex and society as a woman, as a black woman in the United States, as a Caribbean black woman in the United States. Like, it's so many different layers of having to climb through and shine. And I'm still on the journey of trying to do that. But I think by being myself, by daring to still continue going on this journey, I'm giving somebody else an opportunity to see themselves, who may not necessarily have all these different subcategories to fit into, as a person who can be their authentic self and do what they want to do with their lives, regardless of whether or not we're in the same Venn diagram of artist or writer or, AI artist. I think, however, with regard to AI being a computing system, there is this innate fear of it turning into Terminator. It's all in the back of our minds. It's like, well, if we give the computers this much control, what's going to become of humanity? We will all die. And yeah, that's a real fear. But once we went on the internet, we all signed on to be part of that fear. We already set that ball in motion. And once technology has existed for some time, even if we decide to roll back AI, someone else is going to start it all over again. So let's hope and pray that the people that are in charge of creating these platforms are doing so in an ethical way.
Okay, so thank you, Sparkle. And what you're saying, I'm hearing a lot about, authenticity, also being vulnerable, and pivoting over to JR. I want to know, in your position as Executive Director of Admissions at Tepper, how do you know how to recognize authenticity in an MBA application?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I think, just as we were talking about, maybe you just always assumed there was going to be authenticity years ago because you didn't have all these other maybe like support systems or tools or other things that can craft these stories that may or may not be true, right? When we're looking at, again, this is where, like what I said before, where are those ways to check on that later? It's hard to do it in that initial application submission, right? Because we're going to ask for, resumes and essays, and now we have a video essay that goes along with that. I know everyone has that as well, and there's probably ways to game that system with AI as well. But I think that first piece is consistency throughout the application, because I think that's even where you would have seen that previously for authenticity, because you've always had people that were helping, be proofreaders or coaching them on content. So when it doesn't have that shared voice throughout, that's going to be the first piece. And as I said, almost every school has this interview, or that we'll say like a personal interaction phase. That's going to be, we'll say, that next bigger authenticity check. But, and I brought this up, and even hearing kind of Sparkle go through her stories, the thing that I love most about as we kind of enter into like a new age of a technology, a lot of times that levels the playing field quite a bit for those that maybe don't have the resources others do. And I'll give you a quick example of that. Someone that goes through and maybe has like the resources for MBA coaching, or maybe already has everybody within their network that has an MBA, they're getting coached through things of how to approach this, or maybe how you would respond to things. And those that don't come from areas that have those resources, those candidates are at a disadvantage for someone that maybe has those resources to put together that polished application that can really tell their story. So now, my hope is if we can use this in an ethical way, I heard that word numerous times also from Sparkle, but I'm sure we're going to talk about that more here, is that if someone can use that really to better tell their story, or use it to better do those reflection questions that they need to think through to put together that real story and be an authentic story, I'm so excited that I think a lot more applications are going to be at that level that we expect them to be at submission.
I would like to say one thing. I'm so sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I also feel like there's this race that we've all been on for a while now about perfectionism in our society, in our culture. That perfectionism is at the core of people using or misusing these tools.
Definitely. We actually have two comments from a colleague of ours. I'm going to post, I guess the first, Sparkle just spoke, so I'll let her take this first one. Marlena says, Sparkle, what do you think of what AI produces when you prompt it to write in the style of a Black Caribbean woman in the United States?
I've never actually tried that prompt, but thanks. I've not tried that prompt mainly because in the past, the voice that is a Caribbean voice always comes off as a Jamaican voice. I am not Jamaican. So the reaction to its ability to do that would probably not be congruent with what the voices of my people or my culture. But overall, I don't use AI specifically for my writing. I think that it's a fantastic tool to play out a scene, to see how a scene in a story may work if you have context about a character, but it is not right now the way that I write. The reason being, I'm in a position now where I'm learning more about AI, and I'm still trying to keep my authenticity, as Mr. Lucrezia was saying before. Can it be used that way? I'm certain that there's ways of doing that and prompts that you can write that allows it to understand what my language and my culture is. But I also don't think that that's a useful way of me being a good writer. I want to tell my story from my voice, but I also would use editing software if I could to better my work so that I don't have to spend another $1,000 on an editor, which I have done in the past and returned with horrible results, right, from a person. I would use the technology that's available to me to better my opportunity as a writer to tell my voice in a better tone of voice, but not in a way that supersedes my ability to be creative, because that is exactly why I'm a writer.
Absolutely.
I answer the question.
I just want to take what you just said, Sparkle, and spin it back to JR, because you were speaking about kind of using AI as a sort of idea generator to see how a story could play out. And JR, do you imagine that working for your MBA applicants, that someone who's planning on writing an essay, answering one of your questions, they would use ChatGPT or some equivalent to play out an answer that Tepper might be looking for, and then from there, writing their own story, modeling after that? Is that something that makes sense?
I think it is something that makes sense, and I think what's interesting, the more that I talk to people that utilize AI often, or those that really don't utilize it often, the difference in terms of like how you would use this type of software, the prompts that you would use, and I think it was Dr. Corcoran, those kind of writing those questions. It's always interesting how you refine your prompts, and I think one of those was like write in the style of a particular person, right? So they're probably gonna then comb the web of any interview that I've done or other things, right? Like it's funny how it can find that person's voice or things that they've commented on, just like a school, right? So there's so much content out there. They're going to pull our values. They're going to pull all these other things out. So I'm sure it's going to provide them a good list of things that they would think that our school, holds in high regard. I don't mind any of that stuff for brainstorming, right? About when they're thinking through, if I know myself and I know that school, like you are trying to find that fit. So in some ways, I think that that's an appropriate way to use it for brainstorming. However, where I'd say like you probably start to run into problems is if it's going to write that initial story, right? I think this is where like, get ideas, think through how it matches up even to your resume, and maybe it can even generate those ideas for you, feed in your resume, because this is where like, are you really adept with AI now? And feeding it all of this pre-information and then asking questions, because it kind of then learns the scenario better. But we really do want to make sure that someone's then taking that first stab to really write that content, think through how that would relate. And then just like Sparkle, now maybe this is, me personally, this is a bias that I have. My undergrad's in physics. Writing is not my comfort zone. I can figure it out. It just takes me longer than other people. To have some sort of tool to help me craft these ideas I have into a better, flowing story would be something that I would definitely use it for myself. So I obviously couldn't hold others to a higher bar than that. But I would want them to still bring all those ideation back to them and have those initial framework come from that candidate.
I mean, considering everyone knows these tools are out there, it's almost like you're not doing your due diligence if you don't use the tool to at least do the research to figure out the culture of the school and all that kind of stuff. It's like you forced to.
One more thing to plug into a charger.
Look at Marlena's comment here, JR. Tepper can generate sample essays that will tell you what the automatic AI essays would sound like.
No, and I think that's again a great suggestion, right? Go to the most used tools, throw in your general questions, and I think this is the art of essays, right? And we were talking about this again last week, that all these schools have these different types of things. You have, and I don't remember the exact prompt, right? But I know like Duke has something like, I think the 25 unique facts about you or something along those lines. You have some big general questions, and so I think it'll be interesting what it puts out depending on what those essay questions are. But again, for me, like it always goes back to, how consistent is that throughout the rest of the application, and whenever we meet in person, it's always not about, this is going to be a weird way to say it. To me, it's always about the content or the intent behind the essay. Then, like, did you write the perfect essay? Sparkle talked about perfection here, right? Like, it's not about maybe always that perfect way to make it flow, but you'll know pretty quick whether that person's passionate about it. And it goes back to all these other things we would talk about with an MBA application, because it used to be when you looked at someone's resume, they had all these special interests at the bottom. Like, that's one of the most asked questions, right? Pick one of those things and ask something about it. And if it's a shallow answer, you probably didn't edit your resume the way you should, right? Only put things down there that you really want to talk about and have a good story or a good passion around. Don't put things on there because you think that you need them on there.
Right. I'm thinking back to when I had my admissions essay and how nerve-wracked I was about that. And I had my mother's boss read and reread it, even though I was strong in English language, because I wanted to make sure that I put my best foot forward. And he was a lawyer. So obviously he would have had an opportunity to have a lot of experience with documentation and proper language and diction. And then he wrote a glittering supporting letter to my application. I think because of that glittering letter, it pushed me over the edge where other applications might have been kind of ignored. And sometimes people have a language and they have a context of that language, but that language is not the language that is congruent with the application process. So I wonder if the fix for this ultimately will be people speaking the language that is best suited to their talents. Not necessarily in the application process. And I'm not sure that's going to change anytime soon. But what I'm saying is everyone has their strengths. And those strengths is what makes their experience at college and experience in the workforce matter.
What's interesting, Sparkle, about what you're saying is that so much, when, like last week, it's all about finding the fit. Where's the fit? Where is this person going to fit in best? How are they going to fit in with the classroom? So what you're talking about is something that business schools seem to be talking about, and other adcoms are talking about, making sure that whoever that person is and how they're presenting, and JR, you can agree with me or disagree, but how do you find that fit? And you don't want to make yourself any differently than who you really are, right? So it's that fit. I think the word that I heard so much last week was fit.
100% agree. Well, and I'll take it one step further, maybe to clarify that. When you're talking about, and I know we're talking MBA admissions, right? But when you're talking about joining a program, whether it's full-time, part-time, et cetera, right? Like, you're joining for specific reasons, typically to skill up and then to be able to provide more career opportunities for you in the future. And if you end up trying to figure out how to get into school that may not be that right fit, you may not have those opportunities that are really going to be what you're excited for. And so you're not going to be the happy student, and you're going to be an alum way longer than you're going to be a student. So if you're not happy as a student, the likelihood is you're not going to be that engaged or that happy as an alum. So all that means is that you've joined a community that you're probably not going to engage with too much over the next 20, 30, 40 years. So fit is so key, because I think that's what every school is looking for, is who can you have in your community that is that right fit while they're there. They're going to have a wonderful experience as a student. They have those job opportunities that fit well with them. But the likelihood is you're going to have some engagement with them over the next 3, 4, 5 decades.
If I can qualify what you just said, JR, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe also you mean to say that one fit that is for CMU Tepper, it's actually how they fit together with each other. There's a certain complementarity, maintaining that diversity across culture and across industry, if I'm not mistaken, right?
100%.
I'll say one more thing and then I'll stop cutting in. FIT called me last year. They asked for my number in my email, and I thought that was strange, but I gave it to them anyway, and they called me. And they wanted to have an idea of a conversation of, well, how did FIT impact my career path? And I was like, well, I didn't do fashion design. I have not made clothes since I left the school. My graduation was the last skirt that I ever made. And they were like, well, tell me about what your life is like now. and I started talking about my writing and, my art and all these other things. And it turned out that they used my conversation as part of the application process of how they're going to kind of pursue different people going forward. Like there was a whole what my FIT path is and how different people kind of branch away from that path and still stay in the arts. And I had no idea that I had a relevant voice. So even people who may not seem immediately to kind of gel with the culture or the structure of that school or that environment still will see a rippling effect of what that experience in college gave to them even years later, when they can still speak independently and what's the word I'm looking for? Academically about certain topics. I know for a fact going to FIT enriched my education. Even though I didn't become a fashion designer, I become a much more well-rounded person. So I think to speak to what you were saying, maybe the culture of the school is important to the school, but it also isn't as important to the person as much as it is what it does to resonate within them over time. When we're young, it's difficult to know who you are. And sometimes as you grow, then you can see the benefits of what your education has been or what is given to you.
Some really profound words there. And so I think like what I've been hearing is more points towards what we don't want, probably in what we don't want to happen, which is like being somebody whom you're not, as you say. So the question to Sparkle would be, how can someone come up with their own unique story? What are some tips that you can suggest?
Well, I have the best answer because I just went through 3 years of writer's block. For 3 years, I couldn't write. And I put out my last novel and I thought, oh my God, is this going to be my last novel ever? I went through some hardship and I lost my dad last year. And there was so much like pain in my process that I couldn't write anything that wasn't painful. And I didn't want that to be, as an erotic novelist, grief is it's not the path, right? And then I realized like, singers, they exercise, they practice their singing, they go to concerts of other performers so they can listen to their contemporaries. But they also dig deep into why they are a singer. And then I started to kind of strip away all of the things that I told myself, like I can't write, which was like in my face all the time. You can't write. And I realized, but I can. I had just told myself a story about myself that I believed. That was the first thing that I had to step over. The second thing was the competition in my head about who was doing it better than me, who was making more money, who was more relevant, who was getting deals, who was getting publishing, who could make a film. All these things had gotten in the way of the natural creativity that I had. So I had to strip that down too. Your work is valid because it is your work. Your voice is valid because it's your voice. It may not necessarily end up with you becoming a multimillionaire. Maybe it still will. But its benefit is in what it gives to you in the moment. Do you feel good when you do it? And just like a singer, am I practicing my craft? Am I sitting down every day and writing a paragraph, a line, a thought? If something has been beautiful for me today, why am I not sharing it, writing it, expressing it? Is there a better way to say it? And a book isn't written as you sit at a computer for an hour. A book is written over time. A book is a collection, a daisy chain of emotions, thoughts, principles, and even lust because of what I write. So I realized once I started stripping away all of the things I had told myself about who I was as a writer or how successful I was, I realized I could then just be, regardless of whether or not it was good. And I realized if I enjoyed it, it was good enough. So now, after 2 months, I have written 281 pages. I didn't think that was possible because for 3 years, I can't write. I can't create a new character. I'm never going to be as successful as E.L. James, right? E.L. James didn't wake up one day successful. E.L. James wrote fan fiction and became successful. I'm doing a bit better because I'm making my own characters.
So this 281, is this for the next book, Passion Fruit, coming out?
That's a Passion Fruit, yeah.
When's that supposed to come out?
Let's hope soon. I'm down to the last story arc that gets to the ending of the story. And I love my characters. They're so messed up. They're terrible people. But I've created the absolute opposite of my good behavior with these characters, and I'm excited about it. But every day I think of something bad that it can do, and it's pushed the book back now weeks. It should have been done last week. I'm like, well, maybe they'll run away and do something else clandestine. And then I'm like, well, that's a good idea. We were supposed to do 200 pages. This was the whole plan for me and the people who support me. And then I was like, but then she could do this or he could do that. So I'm hoping by the end of June, I'll be done. And then it goes off to its editor. And then we decide about the cover design. And then we decide about production. But luckily for me, the bookstore that distributes my book in Trinidad has decided to take the book sight unseen. So it allows me to be as bad as I want to be.
This summer, I can't wait to read it. You talked about a couple of things that made me think of things that can relate to the business school world and applying for MBAs and so forth. First of all, we've all had a shitty boss. You've all worked for somebody awful, and maybe that can relate to some of your characters. Number two, talking about imposter syndrome, which is something we've addressed a couple of times, a couple of episodes on MBA Waves, and how to find your voice, how to express yourself, how to sing your praises without coming off as arrogant, right? There's a difference between confidence and arrogance that comes through very much in the interview. And the other thing that you made me think of is taboos. And I wanted to ask JR, what are some issues that may have come up in admissions essays that you may think are either taboo? Like we've talked about this once before, I can't remember what episode, but I think speaking about either religion, sex, there was another topic that was quite, like if sex is part of your story, for example, if you're standing up for women's rights or you've been a victim of something horrible, maybe this is part of your story. It's very central to your story and what you do and what your goals are. And maybe this is part of it. Are there some taboo stories? Is there such a thing as oversharing? Where does this make you think of, JR? Give us some advice.
Oh, gosh. So over the years, I've seen everything. Some things that, just are so personal that they really want to share that. And I would say that is a personal choice. If you really want to go that deep, it's because it's something that is that important to you and you feel like you need to share that part of yourself to determine if that is that right community for you, because maybe you need a certain type of community or a certain type of support or whatever that may be. So I would say there's not many on the list for me. The only thing that I would probably say is bad major crimes. Like you may not want to have it as a confessional, but you being part of whatever part of that, and so many people have talked about those things are personal and maybe they're a victim of something, or because our question is about community and like what is important to you with the community and how you have helped move that community forward. So it does lend itself to these very personal things or personal stories of kind of like the foundation of why they have really got engaged at that level and why they've tried to push something forward. So I will say like we definitely have some very personal essays that come in. So I would say that taboo piece for us, not that we're looking for those maybe like harder stories to read, but it's up to our candidates what they want to share. And then, I will say what's really interesting about that is sometimes, depending on what those topics are, we would kind of maybe pick and choose like who could be a good interview, because not everybody would be comfortable if that type of topic came into the conversation. So we're just very mindful of that. So please share all of yourself that you want to. But yeah, we know that some of those can be touchy.
It's really nice to hear that you're, not to say hand picking, but you're really adapting to the needs of the applicant so that you're having the right person interview them to understand and both sides feel comfortable, and it's a healthy exchange. That's good.
Right. And I think this is the next question that we have about how does this all connect to, say, plagiarism and the future of artists and art in particular, because that's such a big topic. And I know that most of us are aware of what happened to Scarlett Johansson's voice. How is this going to be, especially for creators? So Sparkle, do you want to start first?
Sure. So a huge part of the SAG writer strike last year encompassed the usage of AI to replicate or to completely replace artistic talent. That would have been at the writer level, that would have been right at the actor level, and certain members of the production team. To cut costs, also to create storylines that studios would have preferred over the storylines that were being submitted. Some time ago, I wanted to make a film from my fourth and fifth books. So at that time, I was kind of looking at what it would mean to create an upscale from being a novelist to being a script writer, to know what it was to adapt my work for the screen and what it would take to upscale that and who I would need to bring in. And I realized I didn't have that network. I hadn't built that network over time. So I reached out to a friend who was married to a filmmaker who lived in California. And she strongly suggested that I use AI to run the idea of how to write the script, but then not use AI as the script. And we had a whole conversation about why that might be. And I was very much against AI at the time when we had that conversation, because I really wanted the Caribbean Trinidadian voice to shine through. I thought it made me special and unique. And then she kind of let me know that while it might be so, the studio may not want to sign off on something so unique and so niche, that my climb would be harder because I wanted to tell a story that didn't resonate with American audiences in the way that maybe Jamaica would, because they understood what Jamaica was due to Bob Marley and that. And also what it might look like if I tried to adapt my characters to be more American facing, or to make the story more Americanized so that there would be an American Caucasian, because she was Caucasian, so American Caucasian voice as a protagonist or a very important character in the story. And I felt like this is not what my dream was. Because we were moving into this idea about what authenticity looks like and how it impacts the creative space, it made me also I took a long look at myself before I jumped into AI. Like, what is plagiarism? What exactly is it? Is it emulation or is it theft? Right? There's a line right in between. And for me, I realized that a lot of artists borrow from, learn from, and grow from the inspirations of artists before them. It is how you become a stronger artist. It's by looking at why light and sound, why color, why mood impacts your ability to feel and be in the space. Recently, I went to Montreal with my husband. I love Montreal. And we went to the art museum there. And there was giant paintings and sculptures and things that it boggled your mind. I don't think that AI can compete with the human spirit in that way. I think it's an emulating project, and it extrapolates from all the places that we extrapolate from, but without the same ability to feel or the ability to conceptualize why it's important to us. Maybe we'll get to a place where it's so sentient that it can do that. But right now, it's emulating and learning so much from what we find beautiful, so that it's not really at a point yet where we have to concern ourselves with its competition.
So that said, JR, what has changed with respect to admissions for checking plagiarism? Like, this is like a term that seems to need to be redefined almost. I think of plagiarism as copying someone else's work without citing this reference. You're doing a term paper for school, you're allowed to cite work from other people, you got to put that citation there. Otherwise, it's plagiarism. And I'm also wondering, just to take a part B to this, how does this align with the school's general policy for current students, not only for people applying, but...
Yeah, and so as soon as you started to ask that, knowing this was probably coming my way, when I thought more around plagiarism, I'm thinking more during the program is where that's obviously like a bigger concern. There's a bigger risk because of just how many writing samples you have within an application. Obviously, it's just, and over time, they've kind of become more condensed. And and I think we even talked about this earlier, but I'm going to talk about it, but I'm also going to bring it into this piece of it. So many are talking about the ethics with AI, and I bring that up as when we talk about plagiarism, because it's really about how do you now have a new technology and figure out like what are the ground rules to use it to support you, where can you not, And I think that when we talk about like, you know, how do we make sure that maybe that's, you know, not being used for plagiarism, I think it has to start with maybe those ground rules first of like where and how and when, as well as getting people used to using it, because there's going to be some that are plagiarism that is intentional. And then there's going to be some that maybe you're just not as comfortable. You didn't even realize that you're doing something that would be unethical or not really sharing your work. So I think the more we normalize it, like we cut down on that because it's so new and how can you use it and what would be considered not your work? Because there's kind of like that level of someone proofreading and someone then like, oh, but I rewrote this paragraph or this would sound better this way. And then all of a sudden you utilize that tool a couple of times and it's no longer your work, right? So it's kind of the intentional and non-intentional. I think everybody is a little bit more worried about the intentional, right? Of like, if people kind of utilize this to start putting forth things that are just not in their work. So I think it starts with the ground rules, utilizing it, learning it. But in particular, how do we set up that environment? And I think this gives an opportunity, and I don't think everyone has completely figured this out yet, but the landscape has changed for what happens in the classroom. Are we re-looking at how classes are taught or evaluated? And so it's probably a little bit in all of those different worlds to ensure that, you know, we're moving forward to use it as something that enhances someone's learning and doesn't take away from it.
JR, you make me think of a lot of things with that. I mean, it makes me think about when I was in college, so 20 or something, 25 years ago. You know, Wikipedia was a thing, right? And a lot of professors were very much against us using Wikipedia as a source for our term papers, for our research, for our homework. It was just not acceptable. And you know, same thing with my younger brothers and cousins in high school. They were not allowed. And over time, this has become very acceptable. Is it because we as a society have understood it and accept it more, or is it because the people that used it in college have grown up and we're in charge now? You know what I mean? And so looking at you know, AI, you know, I think about my friends who've got kids in high school and stuff, and half of them tell me they use ChatGPT, et cetera, all the time for their homework, and the teachers don't even know. So they're growing up not knowing how to write papers, you know, which makes me think about what kind of skills are we losing now in the post MBA world. Probably, you know, you're writing some emails, but in many cases you have a personal assistant to write some letters for you. You don't, like, writing is not the most necessary skill. We're more on a strategy level, we're in a numbers level. Yeah. So is it important? And is there going to be a shift into what's important? Are we going to start to believe that writing our own work is not necessary? It's just about more being able to know how to access the information. And I could, just to wrap up my point, compare it to a doctor, that a generalist doesn't necessarily need to know how to diagnose everything. He knows how to look for certain signs. He or she knows which tools or resources to look at to identify the problem. It's not all in his or her head, right, at once. So it's about knowing how to get information versus having it. It's very much part of the sharing economy, right? You don't have to own everything on your own. You just have to know to access it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many considerations in that. And because I think, you know, a lot of times schools help push what should be learned, not just for like that first job in the first year or two right after a degree, but those skill sets or frameworks needed to be able to be successful longer than that. And maybe it's how to utilize or learn new technologies or implement them. Mm-hmm. But if you know, right, like if you think about this, the consumer of our products are those large corporations and organizations. And so I think it's a little bit also like, what is that work world, or what is that skill set needed? And then how do we kind of bring that back, right? Because most of education now is also part of engaged learning. So not just like kind of learning some basic theory or skill sets. Everybody wants to have practice a little bit before going out there. So there's going to be all these contexts that come into, to your point, like, I think a lot of classrooms are going to look a lot different, because what really needs to happen, how can you utilize it? Because going forward, and right now, right, like for the last few years, we've always heard about a little bit tougher economy, layoffs and things. I think we're past most of the layoffs for companies right-sizing their companies again, right? Like so many companies scaled up so quickly that they knew that they were going to cut workforce in the future. the thing that I'm hearing more now, whether it's through our own career resources or CNBC, right, like business news, is that most, if they're doing any type of layoffs or you know, like they're changing positions for what those positions will need to be in the future, kind of like an AI ready type. So it's balancing both, like how do we push that cutting edge, but how do we work with those environments that people are going to go into so they're ready for those environments and they can practice that more while they're here in programs. So many things to be part of in this discussion.
I also feel like we're kind of a victim of how quickly the technology grew.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the technology that we had in the early 2000s was you had a cell phone and you had a computer. They were not the same thing. You had time for going outside and spending time with your family because Wi-Fi did not exist. You know what I mean? So there's so much that we've had to adapt to in a short space of time that we, as people who do not have a CPU, it's going to take us longer to figure out what the middle ground between the use of technology and the abuse of technology is. And that's probably going to take us more time than it's going to take for the computer to figure it out on ChatGPT. But I think the hope is that we start to use these tools for our betterment and for our enrichment rather than become slave to them.
Absolutely. Jerry, you're talking about skill sets. And, you know, again, coming out of that AGAT conference, two of the biggest ones that stood out were adaptability and like agility, right? Being able to adjust to an ever-changing situation in the office, in the economy, in the political landscape, and so forth, even on a societal level, climate, all of these things at once. So being able to adapt is such a key skill. And we as humans, we get tied up in our emotions. We get frustrated. We are married to our ideas. We imagine someone who's perfect for this project or this perfect client, and the reality doesn't look like that. So now Sparkle just said exactly what I was thinking about, being a victim to the rate of change for the technology. And maybe there should be a shift in the model of the MBA. It is not something you do and it's done. It is something you join, and it's like lifetime of your career you're part of. It's like an ongoing training kind of thing. Like you're buying into an ongoing, and a school like Carnegie Mellon is known for its tech strength, as well as being a fantastic art school, by the way. I think we have the right guy for this conversation today, along with I don't know. I just thinking about it as we're talking, which is kind of the fun of these conversations. Reimagining the MBA for a future where technology changes at a rate that we cannot keep up. Because by the time you graduate, you're already irrelevant in an imagined future.
Yeah, and I mean, the way to learn new things, I mean, it's out there. You don't absolutely have to have a school to help you relearn new things. However, that's something that we always focus on. We have a learning series for alumni. It's not a full class, right? Like that you would take in a traditional sense of multiple times a week for 8 weeks at a time. But we bring our professors and they'll do more of like, we'll call it like a seminar type scenario. So an hour, 2 hours, and they'll do that for our alumni. So what is new cutting edge? How's the use of this? And they do that on a monthly basis. So, you know, I said it earlier, right? Like you're going to be alum a lot longer than you're going to be a current student. So how does that relationship carry on? And I know there's always, we'll say like that negative side of that alum whenever, you know, Sparkle, I was wondering what you were going to say when you said, my school called me. I was like, oh, well, they were going to ask for money, right? It's a two-way street of what are those benefits going forward in your career. Mm-hmm. And it's not just then the school, hey, you were here, you did really well. Now we want to keep asking you for things. What are some of those things that we can provide back to those alumni to, again, like, you know, even you talked about this, right? Adaptability and others. So we're always trying to find those ways to provide value to those that have already gone through the program.
Mm-hmm. Maybe that's the value prop as an alumni. It's a much more engaged, ongoing alumni service that keeps you up to speed with the ever-changing technology.
And I think, to speak to both of your points of view on that, if FIT had been better with that particular piece over the last 20 years, I might have been able to find more mainstream success as a fashion designer by being able to offer what is cutting edge in fashion. We have this opportunity for past alumni to come back in for this seminar that we're going to have about technology or AI or new CAD processes or whatever.
Mhm.
Those things might have been able to keep me in that world a lot longer and better my opportunities. So I think it should not necessarily only exist for the alumni, but it can exist for the alumni in a way that continues to become a legacy for the school as well as for the people who are benefiting from the education process.
All right. So I'm going to ask you guys some tips to tame the Terminator. So Sparkle,
Excellent alliteration.
Term the Terminator.
Sparkle, like, what are your tips to nail the essays? And JR, what would you like to see more of in the essays?
Nailing essays. What would be a tip for nailing an essay? It's been so long since I've been to school. I would say the first thing that you always want to say in any essay is, who am I? Why me? Why this? What is the process that led me to why I decided to do this? It's important for people to understand straight off the bat who you are as a unique individual and why that is important to the school, the job, whatever your life is taking you as, right? So always start with the who, then move on to the why of the thing. And then you want to talk about your accomplishments and how you want to see those grow or how this opportunity will allow those accomplishments to grow. And also try to close it off with something that you know about the school, that you've done some research about where you're going to study, why they're a good fit for you, why it would be good for them to have you. Those things also, I think, go a very, very long way. And I'm sure that JR could tell me if I'm any closer to how it used to be, because it's been a long time since I have done an essay. But I also feel like a very essential piece of the essay is also just sharing something about yourself that's intimate. It doesn't have to be an overshare. It doesn't have to be about your sexuality or what your parents' fighting was like, but just a piece of why your story is your story, why you've chosen to tell it. So, yeah, I think that's kind of like the arc of a really good essay. You learn something, you feel warm when you read it. There's a connection, a human piece, and also like a connection also to what you're hoping to become.
Absolutely.
I mean, Sparkle, I think you're right on. So, and I'll kind of take that ball and kind of run with it in terms of like what we like to see more. I was trying to think through quickly, like what to answer there. And I guess my best advice there is, I always think the best essays were when you get to learn something new about a candidate. And that's not to say there can't be consistency throughout your application, but if you're going to use your essay based on maybe a bullet point on your resume or something else, like tell me more than I already know, right? Like, I mean, you should be kind of like taking it from that one stage and really providing a lot more information. So I think that's one thing that I would like to see more of, right? Like it gives you an opportunity to tell more of yourself, not just like one or two stories over and over and over again, pretty much at the same level.
It's the real estate, right? If you're already telling it in your CV and other places, like talk about something new.
Yeah. And maybe that is that one thing that you're really passionate about, but then that just like an interview question, right? You can only always go to some level, and then you kind of end it there, because if that person finds it that interesting, then there's going to be another opportunity. They're going to ask a follow-up, right? You can even go deeper. So that's the same with an application. Put in a really good story, and if it's something that's passionate to you, the likelihood is they're going to ask about it in the interview, and then you can go into those other areas. So know that not every part of an application can be the full story, right? And I know, Sparkle the writer on here, right? Like you said, it was supposed to be 200 pages, 281, because you found something else interesting that needed to be there.
Yeah.
But 200 content in 281 pages can't go into one chapter, right? Like everything can't be sewn up.
Right. Nothing happens in one day. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Nothing happens in one day. And also to speak to the admissions process, it's so nerve-wracking, right? It's so, I really want this so bad. I need to say the right thing. I need to be the right person. And sometimes people get caught up in that, in trying to create this image. So I think that's probably where this use of AI is coming in. It's like trying to make that best first impression.
Yeah, I mean, typing into ChatGPT, okay, give me the perfect Tepper admissions essay, and it's going to be flat and boring. It's going to have all these elements, but it's not going to feel authentic. It's not going to be personalized to you. Maybe one day we can upload our CV and many stories about ourselves, and it'll synthesize something that's not there yet. Anyway, we'll cross that bridge when it comes, I guess. But guys, this has been fantastic. Really interesting and stimulating conversation. This strange intersection of higher education and art. That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank both Sparkle and JR for joining us. Thank you for your thoughts, your ideas, for this exchange. Thank you to everyone in the audience who's been listening. If you like today's episode, give us a little thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to MBA Waves to stay on top of all the latest trends in news in the world of business and education. And don't forget to check us out next week, same time and place. And for full access to upcoming past episodes, check out MBAWaves.com. Bye, everyone.